Basically squaring the circle of a theorist like Foucault on one side, who recognises the role that power plays in the way we make sense of the world, but who's fairly agnostic about how that power gets used.
He's an atheist, damn it.
Shut up. The politics of the common good, which you might call left-wing, particularly if you're going to run for Balmain, but I generally don't, because I think that term is a little bit dated. So in short, the question...
Balmain?
Yes. So in short, how do we be smart... Dexter, get off there. In short, how do we be smart, happy and good people when those concepts are all underwritten by the flow of power relations?
You don't everything.
I'm excited about short.
These traditions have their roots in the Enlightenment. The period in the late 17th and 18th centuries and onwards for a solid 100 years when rationality, science and humanism blossomed. Harvard psycholinguist Steven Pinker is a strong advocate for Enlightenment values. And his recent book, Enlightenment Now, this one here, it's actually shit, argues that we are living in the best era of human development. His survey of human societies around the earth seems to indicate that we are indeed living in as utopian a world as we ever had, in spite of the challenges that Luke just outlined. But are we? Is the Enlightenment goal of continual progress a reality?
No.
I also decided to dig into the data to see what I could find, and it's quite a different story to that advocated by Pinker. Let's take, for example, the Horn of Africa.
BBC!
This region has faced famine, war, and crippling poverty for a long time, ravaged by colonialism and then the brutal consequences of free market capitalism. Countries in the Horn of Africa are among the most desperate in the world.
Can I have that for my phone background?
Drought and violence plagues this area. That's actually what Tesla looks like when you shave him. Area, so much so that Alex de Waal noted killing and being prepared to send one's own followers to their deaths is an index of seriousness in bargaining. The conduct of negotiation between warlords is marked by this kind of brutality, rather than enlightened humanism, a nihilistic disregard for human life. The food crisis is even more pronounced. This is a map produced by USA, showing the proportion of the region facing severe shortages and insecurity of access to food. Even more shocking, this situation is degraded from the year prior. Saudi aggression against Yemen has only made the crisis worse. Currently in the Horn of Africa, over 20 million people face crisis or severe levels of food insecurity. And I have deep empathy for their situation because Uber Eats frequently won't Even when I tick the box in the app, I often get a call from the driver explaining that he can't find anywhere to park his car. This means that I sometimes have to get the lift down to the ground floor in order to pick up my food. And that's on days where it's even available. While drought may be a problem in Somalia, in Waterloo the issue is rain, which causes Uber Eats to prevent me ordering from King Street, cutting off my access to the Italian bowl.
You don't deserve the inner west!
In these circumstances, I'm forced to order food from Arancini just down the road, meaning that the 20-minute delivery time is the only compensation that I get for not being able to order a veal parmigiana and tortellini combo.
Is that compensation for it raining?
Yes. Of course, food insecurity is not the only crisis in the world today. One need only gaze towards Syria to see the effects of massive political violence. 2 years ago, the world was horrified to see the body of young Alan Kurdi washed up on a beach in Turkey. This boy was a victim of the long-running Syrian civil war, a child whose family fled the conflict as refugees and died at sea, caught between the brutal regime and an uncaring, ambivalent and anti-refugee West.
Roll him over, he'll probably be alright.
In a civil war that has dragged on for 8 years, the world has witnessed multiple sarin gas attacks perpetrated by the Assad regime. On August 21, 2013, 1,500 people were killed by chemical weapons in eastern Ghouta. The United Nations estimates that 17.9 million people still live in Syria, down from the 24.5 million before the war broke out. Consider that.
Is your famine crisis solved?
I think it starts again. Well, we can't do the food thing, so sarin gas is your diet today. Yum, yum, yum. Yeah, that's right. Consider, like it's a Sylvia Plath diet, really. Consider that.
Is Australia still good?
Consider this. Look at the three people next to you. One of you would be gone if this was Syria. Look at the eight people around you. One of you would be gone if this was Syria. No,
I
look at Travis. More than 6 million of those who remain are classed as internally displaced after being forced to flee their homes to look for somewhere safe and live.
Yeah,
Residents
sorry,
of...
you're running over time.
Residents of... I'm actually not Lucas. But I'm going to go well over time. Residents of Ghouta, Idlib and other towns and cities are forced to live under the threat of chemical attack from the Assad regime, violent retribution from rebels or ISIS, and the muscular flexing of air power between the United States and Russia. Just last month, the Syrian capital Damascus was subject to US airstrikes, and the city of Aleppo is a munitions-racked rubble of its former self.
Say muscular again.
Bombs rain down, a cacophony of rage and shock, and the situation is an exact parallel of that which I face on Lachlan Street. At least one night a week at around 9 p.m, machinery comes and starts moving things or soaring into concrete. This goes on for hours, once even till 3 a.m. I called Sydney City Council at 11 o'clock at night. They have a 24-hour phone line.
Was it a weeknight?
It was a weeknight. I had work the next morning.
Friday?
No, it was a Wednesday. The ranger went out there and they said there was nothing they could do because the RTA decided that this roadworks could continue.
Flamethrower them.
Unaccountable.
Sarin gas was the
Sarin gas!
8 years of civil war is one thing, but 3 hours of construction on a weeknight is quite another. The footage you're seeing here is a recording taken at 11 p.m. at night. Like the millions displaced in Syria, I was displaced from my bedroom to the lounge because of the annoying movement of a crane. In an experience comparable to the flash of airstrikes, I had to endure a bright crane shining a light into my bedroom. In lieu of sarin gas or the dust of Aleppo, I have had to dust the apartment more regularly than usual. And I've considered getting aid in the form of a cleaner, though like the United Nations, I am coming up short on funding for that initiative.
Hang on, what's dusting?
Closer to home, we should also take note of the long tail of disadvantage that follows the dispossession and partial genocide of the Aboriginal people in Australia. What you see here is a map of Australia from the Seven Sisters Songlines exhibition. Explains Josephine Mick. The country is alive with songlines crisscrossing the vast deserts and green coastlands of this country.
That's like one line.
It has been sung into being in the beginning and continues to be sung today. Songlines are cultural webs of memory, intricate maps in the mind of the country. The songlines, like web links, carry spiritual, ecological, economic and cultural knowledge between peoples across Australia. This connection to country is so deep and spiritual, so profound that the Indigenes of this continent were able to navigate by singing. This is a connection that was butchered by the arrival of Europeans. A friend of mine at the University of Newcastle, Professor Lyndall Ryan, leads a project to assemble a digital map of massacres of Aboriginal people in Australia. This is the scale of killing that even today disappears in what the great historian W.E.H. Stanner called the Great Australian Silence. And the legacy of this history persists. The most recent Closing the Gap report, among other failures, noted that Aboriginal life expectancy was 10 years lower than for white Australians. In the most recent quarterly essay, Inga Glendinning was quoted saying, there remains a scar on the face of the country, a birth state of injustice and exclusion directed against that people who could so easily provide the core of our sense of ourselves as a nation, but who remain on the fringes of the land they once possessed.
Go back to that Barnaby photo for a scar on a face.
What was it?
Cranial
disfigurement. Turnbull snubbed the most powerful contemporary expression of Aboriginal custodianship in the politics of recognition, the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Abbott shattered progress on constitutional reform. Howard delayed the apology that Kevin Rudd eventually delivered, a symbolic apology so late after the mild reparation of the courts. I have also endured the ignominy of an apology with no force and a courthouse with no care, the time I was kicked out of the courthouse hotel in Newtown. Unlike the justice meted out by the High Court in the Mabo and Whig decisions,
they don't want you there!
unlike the High Court in the Mabo and Whig decisions, this courthouse chose instead to penalise me for sobriety. There is no reason for it. It was like I was a migrant from another country in the days of the White Australia policy, where the government could apply whatever language test it chose. Can't speak Gaelic? Get out! Can't speak Yiddish? On your bike! Cruel, merciless, fickle and erratic. It reminds me of Helen Hirsch's words in Schindler's List, speaking of her fears in the Nazi concentration camp. The more you see of Herr Kommandant, the more you see there are no set rules you can live by. You cannot say to yourself, if I follow these rules, I will be safe. This is how I felt the time that oversized bouncer, like an aimless subaltern, no sense of destination, dislocated and alienated in the world. I had no grounding.
That's the wrong way around.
I had no grounding. The birthday speech I was offering my friends was interrupted, silenced by the cold and incomprehensible logic of an authority to whom there was no appeal. Like Kay in Kafka's trial, I was taken out into a field and shot like a dog, never knowing of what I was convicted. Like Gregor Samsa, I was shaken awake from my enjoyable Friday evening to discover that I'd been transformed into a disgusting insect, a critter too heinous for human company and thusly removed. I was Caliban, exiled to a cave, Quasimodo, confined to a tower.
Oh, we get it! You've read a book!
Locked in an attic, King Triton transformed into a pathetic sea creature, staring hopelessly through the deep into Ursula's thunderous purple maw. I knew at that moment what the first Australians had been through. I felt the bitter sting of the impersonal common law and the heavy thud of tyranny. And rather than make reparations for this perversion of justice, the courthouse proffered an unhelpful, friendly comment on Facebook. In reality, my circumstance parallels exactly that of Aboriginal Australia. For all the kind words, there is no action. There are no authentic, concrete steps towards reconciliation. That dislocation, the dispossession of the beer that I had ordered, remains unresolved to this day, and nobody cares enough to do anything about it. And so I say, the Enlightenment has failed. The heady pursuit of truth, beauty, freedom and love, guided by the calm hand of rationality, has failed. Because what is truth without food? What is freedom without safety? What is love without justice? It's nothing more than an absolute disgrace. Any questions?
You said love without justice.
You've experienced that.
I also have a question. What are your thoughts on Dendy Newtown?
Not a fan.
Are you pro-Nazi?
I mean, clearly not. Like,
The
I'm also,
swastika is the wrong
He's
way
not
around.
pro-Nazi and he's also not pro-courthouse Newtown.
But the Nazis were a socialist party, Pat.
You've been reading your sassy socialist meetings, haven't you?
Isn't that term just a ironing board?
It's just an ironing board. With a sheet that I've only used once, not for sleeping.
But ask him if he owned it.
There's stains on the front, Pat.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah. It's white.
Blame the intern.
Well, that's all.
I noticed you didn't mention the number of deaths that had died from NATO white phosphorus.
I don't
in
care.
Syria.
Because I had a very specific brief, and that was to make it really clear how much my life is just as bad as a white middle-class man as everybody else.
I'd call that
Except
mission
it
accomplished.
didn't mention the injustice of, it's quite ableist, people like Travis who clear disability and,
Is someone talking like a man? Yes, go.
How do you feel about traffic?
About what?
Traffic.
Traffic generally.
Yeah.
Expound.
Well,
Also, heads up, that crane out your window is moving.
they actually, oh no, that one is, but they took down the bright lights, so
Justice.
just waiting for the next.
What happened to the
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, what?
Post about someone to sound like a banshee.
That was that thing. Oh, that was the saw. Someone's out there sawing into concrete.
Sorry.
That doesn't.
I was doing that. That's my point. Like, I was just
Sweet. So what's the?
Who's next?
so a break, and then we'll come
A
back
break.
for traffic.
I'm